Hello and welcome. I'm Dr. Adam Dorsay, a psychologist in Silicon Valley and the host of SuperPsyched, a podcast dedicated to supercharging your life. Each episode contains fun, high-quality interviews with experts looking at psychology from all angles. SuperPsyched is your tool to get more of what you want in your life and less of what you don't. One way or another, many of us received the message that it was more important to be interesting than interested. So even though we have 2 ears and just 1 mouth, our learning may have emphasized our ability to speak more than our abilities to listen. It's counterintuitive. While listening may be an unappreciated skill, all of us know this. It feels amazing to be really heard. And that is why I was so excited to have a rich conversation about a book I loved on the topic of listening. Dr. Robert Biswas-Diener is a key researcher on the science of happiness, a professor at Portland State University, and the author of many books, including the topic of today's conversation, Radical Listening, The Art of True Connection, which he co-authored with Christian von Neuwerburg. You will learn about listening in a way you've never imagined from a man who is described as the Indiana Jones of positive psychology, since he has traveled the world far and wide, garnering wisdom from cultures very different from his own in the Western world. As for his excellent book, I wholly agree with Tracy Hutton, a vice president at Lululemon, who said, if you're a leader, a parent, a coach, or a well-intentioned friend, there is a lot to learn here. So listen in, radically even, as Robert and I talk about radical listening. Dr. Robert Biswas-Diener, who has asked me to call him Robert, welcome to SuperPsyched.
Thank you so much for having me. I am super psyched to be here.
Yeah, I love your work. I've been a fan of yours for a long time, ever since Courage and your book on it entered my awareness. I devoured that one like Mr. Pac-Man. I just loved it. And I love what you're doing. At some point, we may talk a little bit about some of your adventures, possibly one that I learned about in the green room in Greenland. But let's talk about radical listening. I love this book so much, and you and your co-author just really, really crushed it. Can you share with us what compelled you to write this book, perhaps even all the more so at this time?
Yeah, absolutely. So it came about during the height of the pandemic. Christian and I, my co-author, were just getting to know one another. We had met at conferences, and sort of during the lockdown, we decided that we would just Zoom with one another once a week and just kind of talk about coaching. We're both executive coaches. I have a clinical psychology background, and we just wanted to talk about the process of working with people through positive change. We never set out to write a book on listening, but my publisher said, do you want to write a book on listening? And it happened to be thematically related to what we had been talking about anyway. So it was a little strange, because I think normally when a person writes a book, they're like pregnant with the idea. They're like, this is what I do for a living, or this is what I've been researching for 20 years. And we just really enjoy listening to one another and respecting one another and appreciating that we're both very different from one another. We have different cultural backgrounds, different communication styles, and yet we work well together, and we should put that into a book. We also thought that listening needed a refresh. I've long sort of been irritated with active listening. I mean, I think it's fine. And that's what everyone has been taught. You make eye contact, you summarize what the person just said to demonstrate that you're listening, you ask for clarification. But I realized in 50 plus years, I've never once summarized what a friend said in a conversation. No one's ever been like, oh, I can't believe it, I just broke up with my girlfriend. And I never said, well, it sounds like you're going through a hard time because of this split that happened in your life recently. And when I realized that, I just thought, well, it feels so artificial, right? So I wonder if we can just kind of maybe build on it. I'm not looking to dismiss it, but maybe just think about it in new ways. That was the seed of everything in the book.
Wow. What an interesting series of events. And I'm not going to engage in active listening, especially after that. But what I would love to ask you is this. What is radical listening? And I know that's probably something everybody asks you, but I've got to just get started with the taxonomy.
Radical listening, it's not intended to mean shocking or something you've never thought of, or look how smart we, the authors, are. But it starts with the idea of you have an intention for listening. And it should be a positive intention. Of course, you don't have to listen to everyone. But if you want to maintain or establish a relationship with someone, you probably ought to be listening to them. But you listen with intention. So, for example, you could be listening to learn, or you could be listening to validate someone, or you could be listening to undermine the person's argument. And whatever your intention is going to direct your attention, because we are cognitive misers. We want to have very efficient listening strategies. So if I'm listening to learn, I'm going to pay more attention to keywords and concepts, relations between what's being offered and my own web of knowledge. If I'm listening to validate someone, I'm probably going to attend more to their emotional experience, the emotion words, emotion expression. If I'm listening to undermine someone's argument, all of my attention is going to go towards weak evidence, inconsistencies, spurious arguments. So whatever it is that your intention is going to laser focus your attention. And we think that that's a very different way of thinking about listening than just sort of you're just this giant receptor somehow magically taking in everything.
Beautifully said. And culture really has a massive impact on speaking and listening, as you describe in the book. And I was wondering if you could share with us, particularly in the United States, why it is that listening gets very little airtime relative to speaking and debating and all the other things that are that form of production rather than reception as it relates to language.
Sure. I love the topic of culture in particular. And I think of culture as sort of a script for how to be that you're taught, how to be in line at the checkout at the grocery store, how to be when you're riding on an elevator with someone, how to be towards your parents, how to be with someone of higher status, right? Whatever it is, the script is not just your food or your clothing. It's really sort of what's appropriate to express, what kind of emotions are appropriate to express, how do you see yourself? And I don't think there are good cultures and bad cultures, but I think there are very different cultures. So one of the this is the culture in which we're having this discussion, one of the American cultural narratives is about individuality, agency, and self-expression. It's kind of like, hey, look at me. It's good to look at me. Every time I interact, it's an opportunity to reveal who I am, to express who I am. And there's a whole bunch of good stuff that comes out of that. We get to be a pretty creative culture. We have a lot of entrepreneurialism. We feel like we can actually influence lots of things. It's a very optimistic view, which tends to be pretty good. But it also preferences speaking, and it does not preference silence, for example, which is one of the kind of contexts for listening that you need to have. If you look, by contrast, I'll just use Japanese culture because it's a very different cultural script. They are more about duty, obligation. How do I fit together with the group? It's not that I can't express my own goals or wants, but that I wouldn't want to do that if it runs afoul of the larger group good. And their silence, for example, is not thought of as an awkward moment. It's thought of as respectful. It's thought of as a time to be thoughtful. So it's often interpreted as this person's really engaged in due consideration. They're trying not to insert themselves prematurely. They're trying to read the room, as it were, understand how much maybe general consensus there is for certain ideas. And so what you get is just two different interaction styles, sometimes which don't go together because of something like silence. We just see silence either as awkward or thoughtful, respectful. And so, of course, that means the two groups are going to treat those moments differently.
The book is full of explanations as to how and why of radical listening. Can you state a business case for why listening might actually generate a higher ROI on the bottom line for businesses?
Sure. There's definitely data on this. Fortunately, some researchers have gone out and done everything from meta-analyses to lit reviews to specific studies. And you find a wide range of research outcomes. So, for example, in some roles, like sales roles, salespeople who are better listeners perform better. And that sort of makes intuitive sense to us, right? You're listening to customer wants and needs. You're able to cater to them by tailoring your offering to exactly what they want. That just would make a certain amount of sense. I'm really attracted to the leadership studies that suggest that perceptions of leadership are important. And leaders who are viewed as better listeners are also viewed as more influential. And a lot of what leadership competency is dealing with making decisions under uncertainty, essentially, and big strategic decisions. And so leaders have to have the capacity to listen and listen across roles and across levels. One of my favorite interviews that I did for the book was with an executive who was in charge of a number of businesses across Southeast Asia where they spoke different languages, where they were actually in slightly different industries, related industries. And she admitted it's really hard for me as a leader to listen because, first of all, my role is to think big, broad, strategic. And sometimes if I'm speaking with a line manager, a middle manager, they're just talking about day-to-day operations. And it's just like so far out of my purview, I almost just can't understand them, let alone do we just even speak the same language. And so what she ultimately did is set up listening ambassadors who were able to translate what those people at those other roles were saying into what do I need to hear? How does this relate overall to my need to create strategy, my need to be nimble, my need to whatever it is she was emphasizing in the moment. And I thought that was a really interesting form of listening. It's like listening through an intermediary.
And I love the idea of listening to other perspectives and really, really almost as if you're listening to another language. What do we lose when we don't listen to people who are outside our spheres at work? We may actually kill the company. And I'm also thinking about how there's such an emphasis in the United States about being interesting rather than being interested. I remember learning when I went over to Japan, it's really important to be interested, possibly more important than being interesting. I learned that from a professor there. It was one of these things I learned at 19, and it just my head felt like it was going to explode. It was just so shocking because I came from such an interesting culture where that was the sole emphasis. And if this woman who was running this division within the company wasn't willing to be interested, she could have lost so much. So there are so many cases, including the sexiness case. I work with men, and sometimes we'll get a call from a wife saying, "Hello, Dr. Dorsay. I know you can't respond to this call, but I just want you to know my husband is so much sexier. He's listening to me." We know that this is a really important skill to inculcate in our people. This needs to be part of the curriculum, Robert. But let's talk about bringing sexy back through listening. What does it do for relationships, being a radical listener?
It's basically good across the board. When you engage with someone with intention, it can create better connection. And this is how, because not only do you have your own intention, I want to listen to validate you, I want to listen to learn from you, I want to listen to help you solve a problem, to understand more about what you're going through, whatever the motives are. But the other side of that coin is the speaker also has an agenda. They want to be heard or validated. They want to have advice given to them or a solution offered. And so you need to optimally match what you're offering as a listener and what they are asking for. So if you tell me, Adam, I've got a heavy sofa, it's in my dining room right now, I'd love it moved to my living room, and I come to you and I just say, wow, my heart really goes out to you. That must be so hard. I can't imagine what it would be like to have a piece of furniture I can't move. Good luck with that. I'm giving you a load of empathy, But it's not.
I really want this for you.
Yeah, exactly. But what you really want is help moving the thing. Right?
Exactly. That's why I said, I really want this for you. I couldn't resist.
Yeah, exactly. You have to match what the person's want. And so that's one of the biggest disconnects is when someone just wants to be heard, right? I just want to complain. And I just basically want you to tell me that I'm a victim and no one's ever had it so hard so I can feel good about my suffering. And you're giving me advice instead. And that's not what I'm looking for. So I think just if you can kind of entrain the two agendas, the speaking agenda and the listening agenda a little bit, that's where you feel really connected.
I was listening to a child describing his relationship with his dog. And he said, I love talking to my dog because he looks at me and basically, I forget the way he said it. He was like 9, but he basically doesn't give me advice. He just listens.
That's amazing.
I just thought, yeah, that's right. Isn't that what we're all looking for? And I'm so grateful to people like Dan Siegel, who's been so instrumental in the field of, now you're nodding. So you know this guy, he's amazing. A neuropsychiatrist out of UCLA who basically came up with this idea, a concept called interpersonal neurobiology, which basically comes down to, do you feel me, man? And the answer is yes, I feel you. We want to feel felt. We don't want to just basically be heard and then given advice, or necessarily, sometimes we do, but in many contexts, we just want to feel felt. And that is such an antidote to loneliness, which we all can feel existentially. You're nodding.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that intention of listening to appreciate the other person, I'm using the word appreciate broadly, is sort of almost like the core intention. Like, I just want to validate your experience, your right to your feelings, the right to your thoughts, regardless of whether I agree with them or have a judgment about them. I don't think it stops there, though, because sometimes someone does want some advice. They do want you to help them move the sofa. They do want you to actually understand. They do kind of want you to agree whether or not that's appropriate. So there's a bit of a tango, I think, around the intentions and the intention shift. But I believe that what you're talking about is the core, which is just appreciating the person.
When I first came across your work, and I'm a big fan, as I mentioned to you, of your father's, whose memory is definitely a blessing and whose research I cite all the time. And apparently I'm not alone. He's one of the most cited in the field of positive psychology and in the science of happiness and fulfillment. So grateful to Ed Diener. And you were described, when I first read about you, as the Indiana Jones of positive psychology. And I just need to go there for a minute, because you've been to so many great countries. You've spent so much time listening, not being the, I hate to even say it, but the ugly American visiting a country. I'm guessing that when you went over there, you probably had your ears on. And so much so that you told me a story of something that happened in Greenland, let's just say. And I was wondering if you could share listening as it relates to being overseas, as well as, of course, the Greenland story, because it's just too good not to include.
Sure. I'll tell you 2 quick stories from Greenland. The first one directly about listening, which is, my birthday is on July 27th, and I happen to be in northern Greenland on my birthday. And I learned that it was this young kid's birthday also that same day. I think he was turning 13, so it was becoming a teenager, kind of a fun landmark birthday for him. And someone invited me to his birthday party. So we walked across this very small, remote town. This is up at 78 degrees north. It's sunny for weeks and weeks at a time. About 400 people living in this village, no paved roads. It's very remote. We walked over to this house, and I was galvanized inside. I'm about to go to a birthday party. I'm going to do my self-expression thing. It's my birthday too. We've got this in common. What a great way to connect. And we walked in, and it was just silent.
Oh.
And I was told that I should shake hands and I should have a little bit of money in my hand. So I'm going to pass a little money to him as a gift, right? So just a couple little bills. And I just say happy birthday. And then I just go sit down. And there were about 8, 10 of us sitting on chairs and sofas around the living room. There was some tea and coffee out. There was a little bit of cake out. You could kind of get what you wanted. But basically no one was speaking. And we're all just kind of sitting around. There's a couple old guys looking out the window to the sea. I think at one point, maybe one of them just pointed something out and the other one nodded or grunted. And I stayed there for an hour. And my host, who I had come in with just after an hour, just said, well, I think we'll go. Thank you so much. Happy birthday. And I shook the kid's hand again. Happy birthday. And we walked out. And that was considered completely appropriate and even enjoyable. Very different than the birthdays I've been to here.
What was your interpretation of that? What did you make of that form of connection and interaction without speaking?
I don't know who coined this term, where it came from or how I learned it, but it's this idea of spanning time, which is just sort of I'm doing one thing, you're doing one thing, but we are together in the same area doing our own thing. So maybe you're talking to the person next to you and I'm just sitting here eating cake, but the togetherness is what's important. I think culturally, I mean, they're a tribe of hunters, is Inuit people, and I think they spend huge amount of time out on the sea ice around fishing holes or sealing holes, to get seals. And they're just absolutely quiet. And they spend a lot of time scanning the horizon and just looking. And I think that's just been built into their culture. You just be quiet. You're just very observant, very watchful. I suspect they probably think we're chatty like birds or something. So probably there's some kind of almost evolutionary or cultural benefit in their society to having some amount of silence. But I think they found it quite comfortable. Like it didn't have any of the awkwardness for them, I'm sure, that I felt. And again, it's a different cultural script. In the book, I include a study by Deborah Tannen, kind of famous linguist. And basically, she went to Thanksgiving with a Jewish family in New York City and just tracked their conversation and how overlapping their speech was, how people felt completely entitled to just interject something or to veer off and say, let's take the conversation this direction. Now let's pull it back that direction. And one of the things she found that I thought was so interesting was the perception of pauses, that people who are in these kind of more polite turn-based cultures see pauses as very short. So if you pause to think of a word, they're like, oh, that's just a tiny pause. I shouldn't jump in. But this family in New York, for example, would see those pauses as huge. So if you stop for even a second to think of a word, they're like, oh, I stopped talking. That's a perfect place for me to jump in. It's a perfect place for me to make a joke. Perfect place for me to say, oh, wow, or whatever it is. And so they're actually just perceiving what's happening in the conversation slightly differently.
So good. And, I almost interrupted you when you said I was in northern Greenland because it was just almost too funny to say, like, as if southern Greenland wouldn't be cold enough. Wow, is all I can say. So let's talk a little bit about the other Greenland story.
Yeah. So one of the things that I've really enjoyed in my career as a researcher is getting out of the research laboratory and into the field. I long ago thought it's just great to actually go talk to folks. I learned this. One of my first international studies was working with people living in very impoverished kind of slum areas in Kolkata, India. And before I went over there, half the people I met said, oh, you don't have to study the happiness of people living in impoverished areas in Kolkata. We know they're miserable. They don't have Harry Potter books. They don't have Dyson vacuums. There's no way they could possibly be happy. Don't waste your time. And then the other half of the people I talked to were like, oh, Robert, you know that they're like the happiest people in the world, and had this just a very romantic view of how awesome it must be to be living on under $2 a day and having food insecurity, and just how free and full of light all these people must be. And I just thought, what if we just went and talked to them, right? That I think is probably the most respectful thing we could do, or go listen to them is really what I was interested in, just doing thousands of interviews where I just want to say, like, tell me about your life. Tell me, do you consider where you live crowded? How would I know what your perception is? So we did this also in northern Greenland, stayed there for about 6 weeks. And we were interested in just interviewing people. We also wanted to go get people when they were engaged in their natural activities, like hunting and fishing. So we would take these tiny boats out through icebergs to these remote fjords where they were fishing for days and days. And we would just kind of interview them while they were fishing. How you feeling right this second? What do you like about this experience? Those types of things. But while we were kind of in the fields, we also had to find our own food. And it's the first time in my life I've been very far away from grocery stores or any real means of finding a food. So if we wanted to eat, we had to hunt. And the only hunting at this time of summer was to catch birds out of the air. These birds are called auks, and they fly in these huge flocks in off the ocean against the rocks. It's very rocky terrain there, and kind of into the hills looking for insects. And so we climbed high up into the rocks and laid down, and we had these long poles with nets on them. And we would just try and hide ourselves. And then you would hear the flapping of 10,000 bird wings coming, and they would fly over. And as they flew over, you would pull the pole and try and net one of these birds. I'll be honest, it's super hard to grab a bird in flight out of the air.
Oh my God.
I mean,
what are we talking about?
They're made for flying. They're super good at it. And so in 2 hours, me and my Norwegian colleague caught 2 birds. And I felt, I think, a certain sense of pride, right? Like, oh, I hunted for my food. It felt very primal. I felt great. These were not big birds. I knew I was going to be pretty hungry that night. But, I walked down off this hill. We were kind of drenched with rain. It's pretty cold there, just above freezing, just a few degrees above freezing. I was shivering, but I just felt almost artificially inflated walking into town, this village with these 2 birds. And the kids literally pointed and laughed at us, which nothing will take you down a peg more than children pointing and laughing at you. So we stopped by Hunter's house. He lived at the edge of the village. And he was like, oh, I see you got some birds. And we said, yeah. But, I don't know if there's a lot of birds, not a lot of birds. I suspect not a lot of birds because the kids are laughing. And I said, what would be like a proper amount of birds to get? And he said, oh, you can't go by local standards. You guys are foreigners. Anything you catch is amazing. Well, just tell me for you, what would you catch? He said, you cannot compare yourself to me. I said, on your best day, how many of these birds did you catch? And he said, 770.
Absolutely amazing. And I'm guessing that to some extent, just to bring it back to radical listening comes to the fore. You have to use all of your senses to do what you did out there for your survival. And I love that you said that you listen to these cultures, because I really get it that you do. It's such an old chestnut or a cliche to say, we have 2 ears and 1 mouth, use accordingly. Nobody does, but you apparently have been living by that dictate, particularly when you live overseas. And that's really cool that you did that.
Yeah, Adam, I'm going to be honest with you. And I don't know, I'd be interested in your experience too. It's something that I turn on, but it's not natural to me.
Right.
I'm capable of being an excellent listener, but people who know me really think of me as an excellent speaker. No one's like, oh, wow, you're just born to listen. But it's there in a pinch if I need it.
I think a developed skill can eclipse one's natural talents. It's just my own experience. I kind of believe in that Adlerian idea of from inferiority to superiority. You're a wonderful storyteller. I mean, already I just want to sit around a bonfire and just listen to you talk and just say, okay, Robert, have at it for the next 3 hours. Let's go. But I can also tell that you have that beautiful reciprocal capacity. Like if I was to have a beer with you, I would get back in my car afterwards and say, he was totally interesting and he had the capacity to be interested. I was told that Winnicott once said that psychological well-being can be demonstrated, paraphrasing it horribly, through one's ability to share oneself and to take in the experience of another. And so you have developed this ability. You have developed the ability to catch birds and catch words. And that's a pretty great thing.
Yeah, I really like that. Both the Adlerian bit Yeah, that's quite nice. I am interested in people, and this is actually something working with my co-author, Christian van Nieuwerburg. He grew up in Lebanon during the Civil War. It was all about kind of being aware of context and listening so you could be safe. What part of town were you in? Which faction were people from? But also his mother was Japanese. And so he was raised with this very turn-based, polite, you always let someone speak. So he just grew up with a certain style of listening that's extraordinarily respectful. And so I listen to him talk, and he'll say things like this. You don't have to accept what another person is saying, but you have to accept that they can arrive at those thoughts, that they have wisdom and experience and strengths and values. And that led them to what they think, even if you don't agree with what they think. And so if you're having a hard time with someone, quit listening to their outcomes or their opinions and start being curious about them and their process. What evidence are you weighting? What is it about you that thinks this is important? How are you languaging this? What does this mean to you? And he said, and if you need help doing that, just remember this. Everyone, absolutely everyone is in the middle of something.
One of the tenets of self-compassion is that universal nature of suffering, that Buddhist tenet. And every one of us, all of us is going through something at this very moment.
Yeah.
What a blessing to get to work with someone like Christian, who's got such a cool, it sounds like he's probably part Maronite, part Japanese, because he's got the name Christian. He was living in Lebanon. He was there.
Good noticing. You,
okay.
I mean, if your name's Christian, you know that.
And oh my God, what wisdom he was able to glean, and probably, I'm guessing, over the years, with compounding interest, benefit from that. I didn't learn about the blind men and the elephant until I was a grown man. I didn't see Rashomon, where you see all these different perspectives on the same thing, until I was in my 20s. So to have been raised by a mother like this, who was able to say, hey, listen, this is the deal. And then he took it and he ran with the ball. That's incredible.
It's one of the things that has been, I think, the most extraordinary outcomes of our collaboration. I mean, you would say, of course, this book, Radical Listening, is the outcome, but I have impacted him because I've taught him the importance of interjecting. That sometimes if you just wait 10 minutes and then you wait till the person's done talking and you say, I'd like to go back to something you mentioned 10 minutes ago. How dismissive that can feel. Like I haven't really been listening because I already decided 10 minutes ago what I wanted to talk to you about.
And the last 9 minutes and 30 seconds, I've been gone.
Totally. So he's actually experimented more with just jumping in with like an, oh, wow, or, oh, I can't believe that, or that's so interesting. Tell me more. And he loves it. And he really does think that he calls them emphatic interruptions, like to put emphasis on something, are really wonderful. And then in turn, he's taught me to slow down and do maybe fewer of those and just listen kind of with more patience and a more open heart, which again, I've got to put some effort into doing that. So I'm not just going to do it naturally or do it all the time, but I definitely see how it's beneficial when I do it.
Let's go right into interruption then. Interruption, the good, the bad, and the ugly. Let's get into it.
Yeah. So we have a whole bunch of skills listed related to listening well, listening radically. And one of them is interruption. And this is one of the more radical ideas, is that interrupting could be the highest form of listening. And Christian said, Robert, we cannot call the chapter interrupting. That just sounds too rude. And we went around and around and we finally called it interjecting, which was a pill he could swallow. So all interrupting or interjecting is overlapping speech, just two people speaking at the same time. So even when I'm speaking and you say, that's a very mild form of interruption. If you say, oh my gosh, I can't believe it, that's a form of interruption. We don't perceive those as interruptions because they don't take the turn from the speaker and keep it. Instead, they return the turn right back to the speaker. So if I say, I can't believe it, tell me more, you just think that's polite almost. If I say, oh, I can't believe You lived in Japan. I also spent some time in Japan. Let me tell you about my time in Japan. That's what feels rude, that I've grabbed the podium from you, grabbed the microphone, however you want to say it, and I've kept it. So you want to avoid that. But we often are doing things like inserting a quick joke, inserting an exclamation, inserting surprise, interjecting a question like, wait, who did you mean?
Mm-hmm.
Wait, are you talking about your brother-in-law here? Those are all complete interruptions that also signal to the person, I am as engaged as it gets.
Mm-hmm.
I'm right here in the moment with you.
I love that. And Seinfeld would suck if they didn't have those types of interruptions. And I believe at Black Church on Sundays, when the preacher is speaking from the podium and somebody says, preach it and amen, brother, that's a form of quote interruption, except it's not. It's a form of, I would say, adding salt and pepper to the mix. It's adding flavor enhancement.
Yeah, you're showing, hey, I'm engaged. I'm right here
Yep.
in the moment with you. I'm hearing you loud and clear and I'm into it.
I love it. I'm glad that you called that out. What are some basic skills that we muggles must know from your vantage point as it relates to listening? What's a muscle we can grow as one who's grown his own?
I'll just talk about one, but we have some skills that we think of as internal. They're happening within you. They're non-observable. Mm-hmm. And then some that are behavioral that you would actually see. And interjecting is a behavioral one. Mm-hmm. You could say, oh, I saw this person as doing these strategic interruptions. One of the internal ones, I just mentioned this before, is acceptance. And it doesn't mean you're accepting what the person is saying. You're accepting the person's right to say it. So you're accepting, we are in this situation. I'm accepting that you have a point of view. I'm accepting my own limitations. And the trick here, this is one of the hardest ones, I think, because it requires intellectual humility. And if listeners here don't know, intellectual humility is like a cousin to humility. Humility is not thinking that your inherent worth is better than other people. Intellectual humility is that your thoughts are not inherently superior. That is, I recognize that I have some normal biases, that I have my own values, that I'm limited by my own experience, that there's no way that I just happen to be the smartest and most moral person that came up with the best ideas. It's a little far-fetched. So if you start thinking that way and you think the person across from me is saying some things, maybe even that I think are ugly, they're definitely not consistent with my values, but they're probably just as smart as me, have just as much life experience as me, and have just as much right to their point of view as me. I kind of wish they didn't think those things, but I have to respect that they can think those things. And I think that's the hardest one, especially in these times for people. But I think that if you can do that, it all begins with that. I don't know that magically that's going to save a fractured society, but I know it's not going to hurt to just kind of listen with acceptance. And it probably raises the likelihood that they will do so in turn.
I love that so much. The ability to hear a truth or something that at least I can understand. Okay, like I don't see it that way, but at least when I try to step into their shoes, I get it. And it almost sounds cliche to talk about these types of empathy muscles, but in this day and time, it's so important. I just heard one of my absolute heroes of comedy, Pete Holmes, talking with Dana Gould, and he said, if you come up with a simple solution to a complex problem, you're probably wrong. And I'm so grateful to people like Danny Kahneman who came up with System 1 and System 2 thinking. And I think that we need to hear all of this information, even the stuff that doesn't quite make sense to us, as we are trying to come up with a more sophisticated and nuanced response to a difficult problem. We want to hear these perspectives, even those that may seem so far off base. There might be something in there. I also think a little bit about one of the great guests on my program, on my podcast, Daryl Davis. You may have heard of this man who goes to, he's an African-American musician who goes to KKK rallies and eats with them, breaks bread. By the way, the etymology of companion is one with whom you break bread. And he asks them about their values. And lo and behold, these folks in the KKK are really devout Christians. And Daryl asks, so how does what you're doing actually conform with what you believe? And there's this pause. And in response, he has received over 200 KKK robes, which he has in his basement. The guy is awesome. But it wouldn't happen without listening. It wouldn't happen without hearing, in this case, frankly, from my vantage point, a disgusting point of view. But he's willing to do this. He's willing to pay the price and sit and listen to somebody who doesn't even know him, but hates him just because of the color of his skin. And through these conversations, basically allow them to feel their own cognitive dissonance. It's almost like motivational interviewing, but it looks like you're about to say something.
Yeah, I love the story you're saying. And I do think I've heard of him. What a compelling story. It's interesting what some of the obstacles to listening are. And one of the big obstacles, you'd say, oh, being distracted, your smartphone, the things like that. But I think the most insidious obstacles are things like thinking that you're right.
Yes.
Why would you need to listen to someone if you've already got it figured out? Like, I already have my way of thinking. And the moral psychologist, John Haidt, has this idea that you arrive at a moral conclusion and then you go seeking evidence to support it.
That's right.
Not the other way around. And that we're often just kind of miscommunicating, having kind of almost parallel conversations. I don't want to tread too far into this, but look at government policy and someone's looking at something economic and someone's like, well, how dare you look at something economic? You should be looking at science policy because science policy is my thing and I care about what this is going to do to research. And the other person's like, I just care how I'm going to feed my family. I care more about economics. And they're both just sort of weighting different things, but they're having a hard time understanding one another because they're truly not listening.
It's almost like somebody who was a pitcher in baseball saying that the only thing that matters is pitching. Now, we know that pitching, those who are baseball geeks know that pitching generally matters more than hitting. But what about fielding? What about throwing? What about the other skills? Are we just going to throw those aside and say that there's one dominant skill and that's the only one that matters? No baseball general manager would be in business if that was the line of thinking. I love what you're saying about this idea of us based on confirmation bias, just the desire to find supporting evidence for our point of view. This is what makes us stupid. These are the bugs in our brain that have been around since our brains became what they were, anywhere between 35,000 to 100,000 years ago. And they worked for us for our survival at one point, but now they seem to really get in the way. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, absolutely. While I'm on this, I'd like to, if it's all right, say a couple other of these sort of pesky little obstacles, because these to me were a big surprise as I started writing the book. I think like most people kind of thought, oh, well, if you're in a distracted cafe, if you're looking at your phone, like those are the real obstacles. And then as I started getting into all these well-intentioned conversational gambits we have, I was like, these are the real obstacles. So being polite is an obstacle to listening. For example, you disagree with someone, but you don't want to say it because you're conflict avoidant. And so you just kind of make a show of listening to them out of politeness. But really what you're concentrating on is the social script of politeness rather than really taking in anything they have to say. It's very shallow listening. And I think, well, isn't that kind of interesting? Not that there's anything wrong with being polite, but just kind of knowing that. Listening to rebut is a common one, right? I'm only listening so that I can load ammunition for when it's my turn to speak. So I'm already accumulating counter evidence and argumentation. Here are a couple that blew me away. This one I call walk with me. You come up and you're like, oh, can I ask you a question? And the person's like, oh yeah, but I have a meeting in 5 minutes. Will you walk with me? That's a clear signal that you do not have my full attention. You need to come with me to somewhere you hadn't planned on going because I'm already thinking about my next meeting. At best, you have my divided attention, and I'm making a clear show of, at best, wedging you into the small time I have. And compare that, for example, to if I said, I have a meeting in 5 minutes, but you can have 2.5 minutes of my full and undivided attention. I'd love to hear what you have to say, but then I'll have to go. If it's a bigger conversation than that, we should probably make another time to talk. And just how different that would feel.
The reason I'm silent is I'm just taking that in. You've mentioned that in the book, but even hearing it a second time, it really, really, it lands. That idea of politeness, gosh, talk about synchronicity. I just heard a talk by someone who left us far too soon, Rabbi Jonathan Sacks. He's Rabbi Lord Jonathan Sacks. He was knighted Lord in England, which seems like kind of an odd name for someone who's a rabbi. Yeah. But anywho, he simply said, we do not believe in walking away quietly when we disagree with someone. We need to talk it out. To just walk away kind of silently thinking to yourself, oh my gosh, what an idiot. Rather than saying, I think that you got it wrong. Now, that is obviously a very culturally rich notion. There are cultures in which that would be tantamount to exploding gaseously in front of them.
Yeah.
And very few of us have time. If the barista says something that is just way off, and in my worldview, I need to get going and I might not do that. But with the people we love, I often think that a true friend is someone that will tell you that you got a boogie under your nose, your zipper is undone, or that you got spinach on your teeth. That's a friend. And sometimes, somehow, Rabbi Sacks's notion of talking it out, and to your point about politeness, reverberates within me. So many people have very lovingly confronted me. And I was wondering if you could talk about loving confrontation. Is it maybe a cousin to radical listening before I ask you my final big ass question?
Yeah. I mean, I'm no expert on loving confrontation. My instinct tells me that the core of it is, do you want to establish or maintain a relationship with this person? And if the answers to those questions are yes, like I care about this person enough. So it's not going to be the barista necessarily. You're not like, oh, barista, I took issue with the chalkboard sign you have. Could we hash this out to make sure it's politically kosher? That's not going to happen because it's not the nature of the relationship.
Yeah.
It's probably not the nature of the relationship, someone that you're just sharing the seat next to on an airplane, even over the course of some hours, right? But it probably is with one of your friends, one of your colleagues, coworker, maybe even a cousin, an uncle, a family member. And in that case, I think you have to make some strategic decisions. What is worth confronting? How is it worth confronting? And I would argue you should probably listen a whole lot before confronting, because you don't want to foreclose on the idea that I'm right and now I need to tell them why they're not. But rather, I need to really deeply consider why it's okay for them to think the way they do, but how that might land for me, so that we can just see one another sort of in the full spectrum of our humanity.
You nailed it. The connection itself really, really dictates that type of thing. And wouldn't it be an awkward airplane ride if you had a 15-hour ride and within the first hour you disagreed soundly with somebody who's spent the next 14 hours sitting next to them?
Yeah.
But the wannabe comic writer in my head just took great joy in imagining a great movie of that. If I could design the curriculum, and I think you probably would agree with this, I would include improv, because listening is the central tenet. It's not being funny. It's being able to listen to what's going on in the room, reading the room.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think people's understanding of improv is largely what they get through shows like Whose Line Is It Anyway, or kind of that performative improv, which is often done for laughs rather than just improvised, which is just co-created, done together in the moment with lots of uncertainty. Regardless of which form it is, it requires making room for the other person. And that means listening, following their lead. When you put things out, you're not putting things out in a way that close things down, but offer many options to go forward. I think it's a great skill for living and interacting.
Well, before I get to my last big question, is there anything I should have asked but haven't yet?
I think we've covered a lot of fun ground. Yeah.
Awesome. Then I will get into my miracle question. Dr. Robert Biswas-Diener, if you had the magical powers to confer upon all humanity one insider skill that would dramatically improve the life of the individual And since we're all connected, perhaps the lives of the people connected to that person. What would that insight or skill be, and how do you imagine it would improve the life of the individual and all of their stakeholders?
There's such a pressure in that question. I got to say something so clever, right? Something so different than anyone else. And it's not just going to be like invisibility or something like that.
The cloak of invisibility.
Right. Here's what came to mind, even as you were still asking the question. The power of self-care, kind of. And this is what I mean by that. As a happiness researcher, when I speak with people about happiness, they often want advice. Like, what can I do to be happy? And I basically say, you absolutely don't need my advice. You know loads about how to be happy. You've got a whole lifetime worth of experience. What you probably don't have is time and permission. And if you take time and you give yourself permission, you're going to have all the ideas in the world about what to do. And I would give people that sort of carte blanche time and permission, because I think they then would prioritize their well-being. They would be more effective at well-being. And in doing so, they would be more resourceful and better able to show up for others.
My goodness. I love that one so much. And if somebody's even taking a fraction of that, thinking that it would be somehow just self-serving, bear in mind that hurt people hurt people. And what you're suggesting is a recipe for people to be fuller and more generous and, quite frankly, better people. So we got to take care of ourselves first. I'm not going to do the whole oxygen mask on the plane thing, but I guess I kind of did. But suffice to say, I love what you've shared, man. Oh, it's so good to be with you. I've been geeking out to your work for a long time. You delivered hard, you delivered big. And God, I can't say I hope to go to northern Greenland and go bird hunting with you, but I can say I definitely hope I get to meet with you in person. This has been a blast, Robert.
Adam, I had such a fun time, and it was actually great to be listened to by you. You're a very good listener, and I feel very validated through the experience. So thank you.
This is Dr. Adam Dorsay thanking you for listening to SuperPsyched. If you know anyone who might like it or who might benefit from listening, share it. And if you like the episode, please hit subscribe